Every artifact set in Genshin Impact is tied to a character, and I thought it would be fun to draw the Exile. The Exile is a member of Mondstadt's ancient nobility. He used to be a sweet guy before someone close to him died in the family feud. Once that happened, he devoted himself to that feud and lost his childhood innocence. After committing a crime that brought terrible shame to his family, the Exile stole the evidence, the circlet belonging to his father, and fled the city and his pursuers. Now he wanders through the wilderness during his self-appointed exile. He's quite an interesting character, which is why I decided to start with him. He's ashamed of his heritage and doesn't try to maintain the heirlooms he took with him, letting all the fine silver go tarnished. He goes so far as to carve out the family crest, even if this leaves items such as his goblet broken and useless. He treasures his lost kindness and keeps trinkets relating to it, again without making any attempt to restore them. The feather he keeps belongs to a fleeing sparrow who is nestless but free, although considering the grim mood surrounding the exile, it's hard to imagine him taking any pleasure in his freedom. He feels like more of a contemplative, morose character to me. He links himself symbolically into these different items and gathers them around himself as though he's creating an image of his current state of mind for observers to pick over. I wanted to bring that moodiness into my drawing while having him doing something that fits his character. It's never stated which noble clan he's part of, but I think the Exile is part of the Lawrence clan, although I could be biased simply because we have more lore about them. The silhouette of the empty hole in his goblet and circlet looks like it could fit the Lawrence crest, and in Eula's voice lines, she talks about wanting Lisa's help tracking down an ancient family member who has committed a vile deed. I toyed with the idea of having the Exile walking through the wilderness or escaping from the scene of his crime, but settled on drawing him resting at his campsite. I don't think those other compositions would fit the moody, contemplative feeling that I'm going for. The Lawrence clan has a history of bow hunting to feed the people, and I thought it was in the Exile's character to gravitate towards archery because of this history. Any other weapon would probably make him think of the gladiator fights the Lawrence clan set up, and I don't think the Exile would have approved. There are two bows with lore tied to the Lawrence clan, and I chose the sacrificial bow because it stems from the ancient rituals these nobles helped perform before they fell from grace. A bow is also a weapon that can be easily used for hunting. Eula mentions that the citizens of Mondstadt often refuse to sell her food, so she must hunt, forage, and cook for herself if she wants to eat. It's likely that the Exile would face the same problem. This is exactly what he's doing in my drawing, cooking his dinner. He's got his travel pack with everything he needs to wander about the woods. He's supposed to be sitting in front of his bedroll, but I turned it into a log because my lines ended up being too curved for me to think of it as a canvas bedroll. I wasn't looking at my reference when I drew it, which is not how you're supposed to use references. You're supposed to look at them. It's the first time I've done a simplified forest scene, and I was feeling very overwhelmed until I looked at my favorite comics to see how they handled it. I studied Ted Naffe's Courtney Crumrin and Mike Mignola's Hellboy and took notes. I adopted the use of layered foliage to create depth and leaving the bottom part of bushes and trees open. This really helps it connect with the ground instead of looking like a sticker. I like using a wobbly line to do my foliage shapes instead of the jagged, toothy look my references preferred. I noticed that Ted Naffe likes to use trees to frame his characters or to draw the eye along the page, and I loved this. It helped me avoid placing trees at random, which is what I've done in the past. I also loved the black spotting, but I did a scumbled pattern instead of a solid black. Even though I love solid black spotting when other people do it, I never end up liking it in my own art. It feels like a lost opportunity to add texture, and chunks of texture are one of my favorite things to ink. I had a little misadventure when I was creating this scumbled pattern. I started with my rose nib, but was having issues. I touched it to the page and it dumped all the ink onto the paper to create these awful blots. I tried my other rose nib to see if it had the same problem, only to discover that there had been a manufacturing error when it was created. It was smaller than it should have been and fell directly into my pot of ink. I'm glad I was able to rescue it, but I think I'll be setting that particular nib aside. I did some googling and my problems where the nib would dunk ink all over the page is a common one. Rose nibs are notoriously fussy and will do this if you don't handle them exactly right. They can create really beautiful lines, it's a calligraphy nib, but are very flexible and need a light touch. I think I was just pressing a bit too hard. For the rest of this drawing, I used my crown and a Leonard EF principle, and those are less touchy than the rose. I don't think I was adjusting my handling when I changed nibs. It's fun to collect different nibs for your dip pen, but this was a great reminder of how important it is to do a bit of quick Googling to really understand the characteristics of a new nib before you try it out. That way, you'll know whether you're making a mistake or dealing with a broken nib. I wanted to reflect his fall from grace, so I drew him in a tabard that he'd put a leather armor piece over. The sleeves are detachable, so the Exile can modify a shirt based on whatever climate he's in. The lacing also makes me think of a fancy noble's outfit, and I really liked that. He's got some cloth wrappings over his boots to give him more of a cobbled together look. I experimented with different hairstyles for the Exile, since I wanted him to have something that looks wild and good with the circlet. I settled on this longer, spiky hair. I've always associated longer hair with elegance, so it was fun to add those spikes on as though he hadn't maintained it well. I overdid it a bit. I think he looks too aggressive with all these triangle shapes in his hair, and I've got to adjust it when I scan this drawing to my tablet to color it. I think a mixture of square and triangle shapes would work better. I want him to look broody and contemplative, not to always have this potential for violence floating around him. I really had some trouble with the ground texture at first. I created a confused mishmash of lines. I wanted it to look like a grassy clearing, but wasn't sure how to portray that in such a simplified style. I thought back to Ted Naffe's work and put down some hatch lines and little V's. That worked much better than what I'd been doing earlier. To finish it off, I darkened some of the lines to create the illusion of shadows and more depth. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I can't wait to color it. I'll be doing that in my next video, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.